Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session on my channel, Rumination News Network. Thank you so much for joining and hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe as we are about to get into a very concerning and deeply troubling matter as far as geopolitics is concerned. Remember that this is the geopolitical channel of the Caribbean, and this is where we break down very complex stories that the mainstream media and other podcasters are not offering. Now, our breaking story is U.S. builds radar base in Tobago. Trinidad prepares for war. Now, this is a very concerning and deeply troubling matter, as I just suggested before, that we are in this crossroads now. We are on this path of war in the Caribbean. And we saw where Trinidad was already heading on that path. I have been sounding the alarm. Others have been also sounding the alarm. Stop and do not follow the United States on this path of destruction. Do not follow the United States on this path of total destruction and collapse. And Trinidad, at least its leader and the administration of the UNC have not been listening to this very sagacious counseling. Do not tread on that road, that dangerous path. And we're here now because when people don't listen, then they will have to feel, as we like to say in the Caribbean. And that is what is going to happen. Sadly, people who are innocent are the ones who will have to suffer the consequences of the effects, the deleterious effects of wars. Now, the Trinidadian papers are filled with a lot of news of the war drums being sounded. And I can say literally in some cases in Trinidad and Tobago. And we're learning now that that military base, there seem to now be planes, war planes, war aircrafts, which are or have landed in Tobago. And the Tobagonians are suggesting that they are hearing these sounds before they go to bed or while they're sleeping in the wee hours of the night, and before dawn, they leave. So they disturb their sleep. And they are concerned about what is happening. And first of all, when it was first divulged to the public, and the question was posed to Kamala Harris-Becerra, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, she was just saying that the United States military were there to operate and to build a roadway, as it were, at the airport. But it seems that she had to backpedal on that lie that she told her citizens. And she's now suggesting that in the interest of national security, she had to hide, she had to conceal the real purpose that, yes, the US military were still there, are still in Trinidad and Tobago, and that they're setting up a radar system at it's ANR International, the ANR Robinson, rather, International Airport. I'm speaking out of memory, so you have to correct me if you will, because I'm not reading anything this morning to you. I'm just summarizing what I have read from Trinidadian sources. Now, don't come and tell me now that, oh, you're reading the Trinidad Express or the Trinidad Guardian or whatever. You have to read something, and you have to also look at the trends. And we can see a trend here, and the trend is war. And not only am I following news from Trinidad, but I follow news from across the Caribbean, including the Dominican Republic that I was telling you of and explaining to you what is happening here and telling you that Trinidad and Tobago and the Dominican Republic are at the forefront of the war on drugs in the Caribbean region. In fact, they are number one. The people from the Dominicans are number one under the leadership of Presidente Luis Abinader. All right? He has sold out the country to the United States. And right now we have one that the United States is going to be able to refuel its planes from San Isidro. That's a base, a military base in the Dominican Republic, and also at their airport in Santo Domingo. So we are seeing that the war drums are being drummed up, okay? And the alarm is sounded, is being raised for war. And many of us are still sitting. Somebody asked me, interestingly, on the last video I uploaded, is asking the question, what wars have Trump started? And my response to that commentator, that person who responded to the last video, is, are you living in the Stone Age? Are you really living in the Stone Age? And I had to end. I'm done. I am done. Because at this point, if you are asking me that question, and I don't want to use any demeaning words here, but if you're asking me that question at this stage, what wars have Trump started? It means that you are totally misinformed and you're not up to date with the world in which you live. You are not up to date with the world in which you live. But there are narratives online, and many of you online, rather, and many of you are caught up with social media and the nonsense that comes out. Now, social media has a lot of good things on it, but some of you fall too much nonsense. And you have the right-wing nonsense about Trump is a libertarian and he is not a warmonger. He doesn't like wars. I understand that narrative. But you can't just listen to what people say. You have to look at what people do. Their actions are what you have to analyze. And that is what many of you are not analyzing. Politicians say a lot of things because their main quest is to deceive you. And they are the greatest, misinformers, by the way. Somebody was telling me that I'm a master of misinformation. Well, I'm not sure if that person, Curtis, I'm not sure if Curtis recognizes that politicians, perhaps, are the greatest channels of misinformation. He doesn't understand because he himself has been deceived and is a victim of political and perhaps religious deception. As a result of that, he thinks that I am a master, person who spreads, according to him, or diffuses misinformation. And people are just using that word and facts, and that is not factual. Don't read, the majority of the people who are telling me that this is not factual are not readers, and you can see the way how they express themselves, that they are not informed. But they're telling me that this is not factual, and they're giving their opinions, thinking that their opinions are facts. There's another problem that we think that our opinions are facts that should be, because it's mainstreamed. So it's facts. Facts according to whom? Is it the truth? There is a distinction between facts and truth. Facts can be engineered. Truth is the truth, and it is what it is. And truth is permanent, is long-lasting, is eternal. That's the word I should use. Truth is eternal. No, our evolution of arriving at the truth might change, but it doesn't change the truth. All right? The truth, because truth is always eternal. I want you to understand that. So, having said that, Mrs. Percy Becessor has found herself backpedaling, lying, gaslighting the people from Trinidad and Tobago. And they are the ones who now have to, call out her lies and her deceits. Now, tomorrow, Mr. David Abdullah of the Movement for Social Justice in Trinidad and Tobago will be instigating a protest action at the Wood Square. Is it Avenue or Avenue? I'm not sure. It's a square park in Trinidad. And he will be launching a protest action against the war, as we are seeing all the developments, all the signals that war is in the air. And only God can hold back the winds of strife from occurring at the moment. The nations are angry. The nations are angry. And as the song says, by this we do know Jesus is coming again. right? Because the nations, when we see the entire world caught up within this web of deception, and wars are the only solution to peace, you know that something catastrophic, cataclysmic is going to happen. Cataclysmic is going to happen in our world. You know, I was reading the political newspaper last night. Was it yesterday evening? Right. And there was an interview with this gentleman that the writer sought to interview. And they were talking about Trump's war on Venezuela, or his impending war on Venezuela. And the interviewee mentioned a very critical point that I've also been thinking about. How are you going to launch? How are you going to unalive, strike speedboats in the Caribbean on the high seas and think that that is going to stop drug running in the United States? And you're unaliving, perhaps, maybe, we don't know, innocent victims, thinking that you're cleaning up drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and human trafficking in the region. Is that even logical? And there are people who believe it because they have nothing in the mind and they cannot think. They think that somehow magically, by unaliving other people, as Trump and Mrs. Person Bissessor have suggested, they have to be unalived, right? And after they have been unalived, I can't use the K word, then peace will reign in the region. I have not heard such nonsense in all my years of existence. And, you know, we're seeing now where Mrs. Kamla Person Bissessor, because she did not speak the truth in terms of the radar system that has been installed already at the ANR, is it ANR Robinson? You can correct me, International Airport in Tobago, because she was suggesting that it was just only to build some roads or runway system at the airport. And she has now been caught. She's saying, well, because the Guardian newspaper divulged that story, and in the interest of national security, we didn't want the transnational criminal elements or the criminals to hear what we're doing. So it was best if it had remained a secret. You lie and just say, you don't have anything to worry. She keeps on saying that Trinidadians and Tobagonians don't have anything to worry about. They don't have anything to worry about. And if there's anything to be concerned about, she will inform them. Now, they're seeing things. The citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are seeing things, and Mrs. Person Bissessor, you know, decides not to address these concerns, and they're going on social media and they're showing pictures of these planes landing, right? And they say 2 of these large aircrafts, these war planes, landed in Tobago. Okay, I think it was, you know, in succession in terms of one day one landed and the other day another landed. And the only way that the journalists found out was that they went on the 24-hour track system, air trafficker. Is that what they call it, that site? 24-hour air trafficker website, on which they saw that another aircraft, war aircraft, landed in Tobago. So Mrs. Person Bissessor had no other option but to tell them the truth, that it is there to set up a radar system to be able to maneuver and to monitor what is happening inside, you know, Trinidad and Tobago, on land and sea, I think, and in the air, on land in Trinidad and Tobago, and also outside, so that they can detect any drug trafficker in the air or on the high seas, possibly on land too. Now, this is a dangerous path that we're taking. So what if they are detected? What if they are detected? Will they be unalived? immediately, or will they be tried in a court of law? Will they obtain due process, or will they be summarily killed, as we saw happen in the southern Caribbean waters and also in the Pacific Ocean? So we're seeing that all of the war signs, the bells are there, the alarm bells are ringing, and we hear it distinctly in our ears. Sadly, it's not the Christmas bells that are ringing, okay? The war bells are what we're hearing in what is about to be called the festive season. And I hope that they do not start this war before Christmas, because that is going to be catastrophic for people who like to enjoy the festive season. Because isn't it a season of peace and the advent of Christ? As some people say, I don't believe that it's the advent of Christ, but for those who believe it. And we have to admit, even though I don't believe that Christ was born during the Christmas season, but it's a festive season. And I love the carols. I love families coming together. I love the season for what it is, right? And right now, it seems to me that Trinidad and Tobago are not going to enjoy this Christmas season. It's not going to be festive. And even if the war doesn't commence before Christmas or during Christmas, I'm sure that people are psychologically concerned. And those who heard those large aircraft and the noise that they make are not going to sleep, because they are concerned about what is happening. They are concerned, and their prime minister is not dispensing any reassuring words. First of all, she's lying. And she lies unabashedly. Okay? She's not ashamed of her lies. She continues to lie and to gaslight the people of Trinidad and Tobago for or in the interest of national security. They can lie to us. They can conceal things from us in the interest of national security. Now, we understand, if you have been following this channel, that the United States did approach Grenada to have that military radar system be installed at their airport, the airport of the Maurice Bishop International Airport. Okay? And based on what the Prime Minister, Dickon Mitchell, suggested, that he could not do it because, first of all, Grenada doesn't have a military, and it might not have had the infrastructure to develop such a complex system. Well, we're still in the dark in terms of if that is in process, what the final decision was. But now it seems to me that they have decided to move on to Tobago. And that is where the military radar system has been installed. I don't think this is a matter of if or when. It has been installed there. And the Chief Secretary of the House of Assembly of Tobago, right? That's what they call it, THA. His name is Farley Augustine, right? He is suggesting that he wasn't aware. He was only aware when the citizens started to talk. Now, I understand, based on what the journalist said in the Guardian newspaper, that citizens have been talking about this for at least 2 weeks. They have been having conversations on social media about what they have been witnessing in Tobago. And the chief secretary of the Tobago's House of Assembly is suggesting that he never knew until the Prime Minister, the journalist asked the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister divulged to the people that this was in the process, that the United States was building or installing a military radar system at the A&R Robinson International Airport in Tobago. Okay? He never knew. Now, can we believe that? Is that true? If he is the chief secretary, it's one thing that he could say that the prime minister had not informed him, is another thing to say that he never knew. Because everybody there in Trinidad and Tobago were having that conversation. Now, whether it was believable, whether it could have been confirmed, yes or no, the conversation was being had. I'm sure he's on some social media platform. He would have seen something about it. Right? He would have seen some conversation about what was happening. And then he's making all of this going around about, beating around the bush that Kamla had called him when he was the boot camp for some, whatever he was, whatever boot camp he was in Tobago. But he had not got a chance to, to accept her call. And he was going to call her back to see, what she had to say about the matter. And that he's not in agreement with what is happening. Right? That the people of Tobago should first be consulted. All of this is political talk, right? And political showmanship, right? But this is nothing, well, I am not going to say here that he's lying because I can't say that, okay? But it doesn't seem like something doesn't smell well. Something is not right about what he's saying, that he didn't know, and he occupies such high-level position, and the ordinary citizens were there speaking, having energetic conversations, weeks, I understand, about what they had been observing. But that is why you saw like persons like Roger Alexander, who wrote a letter to the US Embassy suggesting that Trinidadians who speak about matters that they didn't know about, which he deems to be misinformation, that their visas should be revoked. To which I understand that the US Embassy pushed back. But do you believe that? Or do you think the United States was the same country that told him to say what he's saying? Because the United States suggested that it does not cancel visas or revoke visas based on people's free speech. Is that true? Is that true, US Embassy? Okay, I don't think that is true. Because I'm sure that when Trump came into office in January of this year, and moving onwards, that the papers were littered rather with people talking about deporting F1 visa students, right? Foreign students because of their free speech, right? Some students were imprisoned in the United States, US citizens. I think this one from Colombia, was it Colombia? Among other students were imprisoned. ICE went for them because of what they were saying on social media and for having participated in protests. What did we see under Biden with what was happening in Palestine and the treatment of the students? No, if they're treating their students, their own nationals, in the way we saw, and this is no fairy tale, this is what was published to the public for public consumption. And people and the United States is now suggesting that it does not revoke visas because of people's free speech. They only revoke visas based on criminal past history and some other conditions that they listed. But is that true? I don't think so. So the fact that both sides are lying, I don't think that the United States is pushing back against Trinidad and the revocation of visas. I think that it will be rehashed and it will be done in another way. But the US cannot be telling us the truth that it does not revoke visas based on people's free speech, because it does. Because, I was even here asking the question, what if our students, foreign students abroad, should write something that is against US policy, US foreign policy, that they could be deported? I think I understand that professors were to inform whichever authority, okay, that that student is a threat to national security. Because apparently whatever we say, as Kamla suggested, could be a threat to national security. And had she told the truth about what was happening at Tobago, she thought, that's Kamala personal predecessor, she thought that that piece of information could have gotten to the hands of criminal elements, and thus they would pose a threat to national security. So now she's saying that they would have to revisit that installation. Maybe it's going to be installed in another place. I don't know. Because she's saying that based on the fact now that the criminal networks know where the radar system is, I'm not sure if they would know even if she had not confirmed. Are people that stupid? You're seeing how big is Tobago? How big is Tobago? They're seeing this large aircraft landing and exiting, right? And the criminal elements would not be there. Well, whichever criminal elements there would be so stupid not to see that something is going on, right? You're not talking about New York City, and even they perhaps would know. You're talking about Tobago, a very small dot on the map. Okay? Yet she's saying that she could not disclose it because in the interest of national security, and that it would be getting into the hands of the criminals, the transnational criminal elements, as she suggested. I am here laughing all the way to Timbuktu. I am here laughing all the way to Timbuktu because the Prime Minister could not have been serious when she uttered that statement. She could not have been serious. And who in their right mind would take her seriously? And that is what we have to ask. Now, I'm not here to play games, and some of you think I'm here to spread misinformation and to play games. This is a serious matter. And I don't think that we have yet grasped the profundity, the complexity of what we are heading towards. This is a point of no return. And you have to ask the people who live in Okinawa, a prefecture of Japan, and those who live in South Korea, in Iraq, in Syria, that this is not a joke. Washington is serious. And the warmongers are not playing with us. In fact, I was shocked the other day when I took up the newspaper and realized that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, had not left the Dominican Republic, that he was still on his visit there. I was shocked. Thought that he had left, but he had gone to visit the American soldiers, the US military. And from there, I don't know. So all of that on Thanksgiving Day that he should have been celebrating with his family, he was visiting the US military. So this should tell us that we are seeing clear signals that war is on the horizon. Very important that we understand that. Extremely important that we understand it. Everything is there to indicate that path. Now, I was also reading yesterday from the New York Times and the other so-called Western newspapers, and perhaps you can say even Eastern newspapers, who repeat robotically everything that the New York Times suggests and says. Okay? But the New York Times was suggesting that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, last week, not this week, last week had a conversation with Nicolas Maduro, the President of Venezuela. Now, the fact of the matter is that it doesn't seem like the conversation, was successful, but they said something which was quite eerie and, to me, very abstruse. It's something that was shrouded in secrecy, in mystery, I should say. Okay, that the President of the United States wants to invited Nicolas Maduro to the United States to have a dialogue. Now, based on the level of aggression with all this military building up in the Caribbean, would Nicolas Maduro trust Trump to visit the shore of the United States? The fact also that he was not invited, he was not allowed, Nicolas Maduro wasn't allowed to visit the United Nations because it was on US soil, and that would have been the appropriate place, Mr. Trump, to have met with Mr. Maduro to iron out this very important matter among other international lawyers and political actors, that would have been the appropriate place to iron out any differences between Maduro and Trump. But Maduro was prohibited from attending that Nations General Assembly session. So now the White House wants to invite him to Washington. I don't think Nicolas Maduro is going to travel all the way to Washington to see Trump. Now, what the New York Times suggested is that that conversation could be good, as well as it could be the last conversation that would have been ever had between Nicolas Maduro and Trump. And that sounded quite eerie. Don't know how you took it. Did you read it? But to me, it didn't sound very well. It did not strike my ears very well. What are they trying to imply there? I don't know, and I don't want you to think that I'm thinking what is not there. But I'm a critical thinker, and I have to think. And I have to question. And I believe in questioning everything that comes before me. Okay? And that is why I could not be a misinformationist, somebody who misinforms, because I have to check many sources to see if what I'm reading is true. And even having checked many of the sources, I still do not put my trust in these sources and look at the developments of what I see happening, because actions speak louder than words. And we can see Mr. Trump building up the war machine in the Caribbean and Latin American region. And the fact that he has unalived many so-called narco-terrorists, about 80 or more of them, suggests to me that he's not interested in dialogue. Because had he been interested in dialogue, that could have been avoided. That could have been avoided. And innocent lives, perhaps, could have been saved. And I think that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, did utter similar statements when he was speaking to President Luis Abinader, that essentially these narco-terrorists have to be unalived. We have to clean the region of these people. Now, how is that going to happen? And how are we going to know who is a so-called narco-terrorist if they are not tried in a court of law? Are we going to indiscriminately unalive them and then say, yeah, we've cleaned up drug running in the region? Is that what Pete Hegseth and the President of the United States is suggesting, or suggesting rather? Okay, that is what I would like to ask. Now, Chalmers Johnson, in his book, The Sorrows of Empire, Militarism, Secrecy, and the End of the Republic, on page 214, chapter The Spoils of War, and I want all Trinidadians and Tobagonians to listen to me carefully as I end the video. As the American empire grows, as we go to war significantly more frequently than we did before and during the Cold War, wars in turn promote the growth of the military and are a great advertising medium for the power and the effectiveness of our weapons. So wars are a means of testing US weapons and the companies that make them, which can then more easily peddle them to others. So if you test them on war, test these weapons by waging wars, then they are an effective marketing strategy to sell to other people. I hope Trinidadians and Tobagonians are understanding every word that Chalmers here is articulating. Okay? And let me read slowly so you can understand what I'm suggesting, what he's saying, rather not what I am suggesting, but what he is writing. According to the journalist William Grader, and I quote, the US volume of arms sales represents 44% of the global market, more than double America's market share in 1990 when the Soviet Union was the leading exporter of arms. Very, very interesting. As the military-industrial complex gets even fatter with more overcapacity, it must be fed ever more often. Okay? The creation of new bases requires more new bases to protect the ones already established, producing ever tighter cycles of militarism, wars, arms sales, and base expansions. And once they create a base, they will never leave. Tobagonians, Trinidadians, once the United States sets up a military radar system, a military base in your country, she never goes. It is permanent. Very important that you understand that. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we began to wage at an accelerating rate wars whose publicity, stated purposes were increasingly deceptive or unpersuasive. We were also ever more willing to go to war outside the framework of international law, right? So the more willing to go to war outside the framework of international law and in the face of worldwide unpopular opposition. These were de facto imperialist wars, defended by propaganda claims of humanitarian intervention, women's liberation, the threat posed by unconventional weapons, or whatever current buzzword happened to occur to White House and Pentagon spokespersons. So we hear now that is to clean up drugs. So that's a buzzword, right? To clean up drug trafficking, to clean up drug trafficking and human trafficking in the region. In each war, we acquired major new military bases that in terms of location or scale were disproportionate to the military tasks required and that we retained and consolidated after the war. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, we waged 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and acquired 14 new bases. 14 after just 2 wars in Eastern Europe, Iraq, and the Persian Gulf, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan and Kyrgyzstan, right? Kyrgyzstan. Now, it was said that these wars were a response to the terrorist attacks and would lessen our vulnerability to terrorism in the future. Listen to him. But it seems more likely that the new bases and other American targets of vulnerability will be subject to continued or increased terrorist strikes. So even though they tell you that they're going to clean up drug wars, the drug trafficking and the human trafficking and the arms trafficking, which they are responsible for, it's going to make it worse. That is what Chalmers Johnson is here intimating. Following our usual practice, we established our bases in weak states, most of which have undemocratic and repressive governments. You know, it's time for us to grow up. It's time for us to come to grips with the reality. We think that the United States is a democratic society operating under democratic norms, but it is not. It is a militarized empire, right? And that is what militarized empires do. In fact, if you continue to read onward in Chalmers Johnson's book, he is suggesting, and George W. Bush did say, we are the new Rome. And Rome wasn't a pretty empire, right? It was the Iron Empire. It didn't have a heart. It killed wherever it went. Okay? And that is what I would like our Caribbean citizens and people of the world to understand, that this is no joke, this is no movie. This is not a Hollywood film. This is real life, and the deaths that accrue are going to be real deaths in real time. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. Like the videos so the videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. Thank you so much for joining, and we will have another video tomorrow. And remember that we have a live tomorrow coming up. We'll be talking more about the war on Venezuela and the implications for Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Gerald Pereira will join us on the live. Please come to the live. You're not showing up. You're telling me, oh, I love the videos, but hypocritically, like your politicians, you'd say things and you follow the crowd wherever the crowd goes. You move there and you move with the wind, and then eventually you will be defeated. The politicians would have won the game because that's what you do. You say one thing and behave another way. Thank you so much for joining. See you in another one. Ciao.